Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, if the bee disappeared off the face of the earth, man would only have 4 years left to live. A lot of people think Albert Einstein said that, but of course, that's not true. Nobody knows who said that, but somebody said it, and they were awfully smart. Now, whoever the heck did say it probably didn't understand that, you know what, if we got rid of the bee population, there would be a huge payday for corporations. That's the point, right?
Ka-ching, ka-ching. They wouldn't have told us that back in the early 1900s had they known that, future disaster capitalists would come along and think this is a good idea. If we have not enough oxygen, too much carbon dioxide in the air, well, we could do geoengineering, and because the Earth provides all that stuff for free, naturally, if the Earth also provides fresh water for free, if we destroy that, we can sell the people desperate for water, we could sell them desalination. Well, over in the bee population, there's a intellectual property-laden solution to the bee colony collapse disorder. Tiny flying robots are being built to pollinate crops instead of real bees. Last year, Harvard University researchers led by engineering professor Robert Wood introduced the first robo-bees, bee-sized robots with the ability to lift off the ground and hover midair when tethered to a power supplies. So they're about to introduce these robot bees. They already have them, but they're going to be able to carry more weight than they can now, therefore to sustain themselves to pollinate an entire crop.
Yeah, nature is a communist. Yeah, they get synthetic bees for synthetic flowers to create synthetic food to feed the synthetic humans. There's no room for humans in this equation. There's no room for humanity. As I've been saying for quite some time now, the machines are taking over. The machines are running the algo bots that are driving the Dow Jones to 17,000. It's not humans. No humans are benefiting from the Dow Jones being at 17,000. Only the machines and their overlords. The vast majority of people out there, none of which own in any meaningful percentage stocks, are benefiting from the machines algorithmically, high-frequency, tradingly, pushing the stock prices up. The machines are driving innovation in the insect space, in the biology space, in the new cyborg space. So on this very show, we've had UFOs fly by many times, as people have pointed out. These are, again, the product of machine intelligence, artificial intelligence. There's no room for humanity anymore.
But that's the thing, is the government knows what the problem is, why we have colony collapse disorder. We know that it's the GMOs. We know it's a combination of the GMOs and all of the fertilizers out there.
Yeah, they committed beeicide.
Yeah.
The bees are communists, so they have to be wiped out. The bees are jihadists. They must be wiped out. The bees are terrorists because they have the temerity to add something to the economy without taking any financial remuneration whatsoever.
So let's look at how much remuneration these real bees in real nature, how much work they do provide for the agricultural sector right now for farmers. Insect pollinators contribute $29 billion to U.S. farm income. This is a Cornell University study in 2010, and the study analyzed the economic value of honeybees and other insect pollinators for 58 crops, including species that are directly dependent on insects for pollination, such as apples, almonds, blueberries, cherries, oranges, and squash, and species that are indirectly dependent on insects, such as alfalfa, sugar beets, asparagus, broccoli, carrots, and onions. So one hive of bees, which is about 50,000 bees, is able to pollinate 500,000 plants in a day. And they also did studies in the UK where they found that to get human beings to do the job, it would double the cost of apples, for example, if you were to try to replace honeybees there.
But if you're part of on the right side of the interest rate apartheid wall, every time food prices go up, the price of necessities goes up, the bank will just give you unlimited amounts of cash at 0% interest rates. It's only if you're not on the right side of the interest rate apartheid wall are you actually being forced out of existence. You're being starved to death. You know, the walls go up and you're in these open-air ghettos. And every country in the world has these open-air ghettos. And then they have the final solution is to put the people in the ghettos, incinerate them, or bomb them. Or, you know, I mean, Israel is leading the way, aren't they? I mean, the Palestinians are in the way, so they're going to incinerate them. That's their final solution. So what about America? You've got the bee population is you got to get rid of it because it's hurting our profits and our Ponzi scheme. Unless we can float another bond to create mechanical bees, our bond Ponzi scheme is going to implode. And then how will Lloyd Blankfein or Jamie Dimon afford their yacht payments? How will that happen? It won't happen. So they have to commit, financial genocide. I think people need to have some self-worth at the end of the day, enough to fight for their lives. But you don't see that anywhere anymore.
Well, the other thing is, of course, if people are desperate, they're willing to do anything. If people are desperate for $100 to pay a medical bill, and yet Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan won't give them a loan for $100, they'll go to a payday lender and pay 10,000%. Or 5,000%.
Well, the problem is the people who have to go to these payday lenders, they blame themselves for Bob Dimon, Jamie Dimon, Lloyd Blankfein's financial terrorism. They're like rape victims. Rape victims blame themselves. They think they're the ones that are a guilty party. But that's not true. It's the rapist that's the guilty party. The bankers who are committing these crimes, they're the guilty parties. They're the ones that should be paying the piper for having to commit beecide, and replace it with mechanical bees.
Another thing nature used to provide, and it worked well, and we lived this way for 5,000 years, was they provided gold and silver. It was honest money. It did a job without any remuneration. You didn't have to pay gold or silver to provide the service of functioning as honest money. Now we've got rid of that, and since the introduction of the Federal Reserve System in 1913, and since going off the gold standard globally in 1971. And because of this, we have an equally messed up system where all sorts of interventions are needed, the equivalent of swarms of robo-bees in the global monetary system and banking system. Draghi seen delivering $1 trillion to banks in ECB offer. Draghi delivering sounds like the bees, their function, they deliver the pollen from plant to plant by just going there. And here he is acting like the natural balance that gold and silver used to provide. Well, he's introduced a new stimulus tool which will hand banks more than $1 trillion in cheap funding.
Well, I predicted this on the show. Last month, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. There's a huge Ponzi scheme. When Janet Yellen says she's tapering, she's not tapering because of the global connectivity of the banking system. When the ECB expands their asset purchases and Mario Draghi prints $1 trillion a euro, that's adding to the net aggregate asset purchase and quantitative easing of all banks combined. There is no tapering. You can't taper a Ponzi scheme. Mario Draghi starts off with €1 trillion. It's going to go to 15 to 20 trillion. When Hank Paulson said he needed $750 billion to bail out Goldman Sachs in 2008, I said that number is going to go surpass 15 trillion. It topped out at $20 trillion in bailouts and subsidies and related contingencies. Same thing with Mario Draghi. It's the last central bank to go down the path of blowing itself in the head with money printing. Stock market's going to go higher, but most people don't own stocks, so they're just going to have the effect of paying more for food and energy, for the essentials. And when they go to the store and they say, hey, where's the food? They say, well, the bees went extinct. Why did the bees go extinct? Because we made money so cheap that it caused a malinvestment in energy production, which caused fertilizer prices to drop to levels where we dumped trillions of tons of it, grew so much food that half of it went into the garbage over the past 5 years. Now there's no food available at any price except you're going to pay, a payday lender to buy a ham sandwich. Meanwhile, Mario Draghi and his buddies in the ECB, whenever they need an extra million, 2 million, 10 million, $500 billion, they just print it up, but it just goes to them specifically, directly. It doesn't go into the system as a whole. It doesn't create monetary stimulus, doesn't create economic activity, doesn't create jobs, doesn't create wage growth, doesn't create society as we know it or used to know it. It just creates a plutocracy driven by Holocaust-provoking, money-printing shysters like Mario Draghi, who, like other bankers in the past who have done similar things, ended up in a not very friendly place.
Well, you talk about most of the population having to go to a payday lender to buy a ham sandwich. Well, the actual bankers in this economy of Europe who are celebrating this $1 trillion free lunch from Mario Draghi. Here's Alan McQuaid. He's a chief economist at Marion Bank in Dublin, and he says this, quote, "The take-up should be large. The money is cheap, and banks should feel no stigma about accepting a free lunch. With any luck, Draghi's next problem will not come until 2018, when €1 trillion needs refinancing." So they're seeing even more in the future.
Oh, I mean, he's saying that bankers should feel no stigma about contributing to economic conditions that are causing wholesale poverty and unnecessary austerity measures resulting in death and destruction. So he's asking these bankers to divorce themselves of having any empathy whatsoever as humans. He's asking these bankers to become their robo-bees, to go from flower to flower and to suck the pollen out with their big, long snouts and then deposit it in their fellow bankers' stems, and to keep this system of artificial banking intelligence going, Ponzi schemeonomics, so that none of them have to take responsibility. The problem is that they all believe that they're on the firing squad and that they don't believe any single one of them has the gun that blew the head off those millions of people that they killed. I say put all the bankers into a circular firing squad. Put all the bankers, the Jamie Dimons, the Lloyd Blankfein, the Bob Dimons, put them into a circular firing squad and give them all bullets. And let's get rid of them all at once. We got to purge the system of this cancer of the Mario Draghis of the world.
Well, here you have a situation that Mario Draghi is addressing, and just like in the U.S. and Harvard University looking at this colony collapse disorder, Mario Draghi and the central bankers are looking at banking collapse disorder. They see this banking collapse, and rather than stop the source of it, the pesticides, the toxins of the derivatives going into the system, rather than do that, they come up with the equivalent of these robo-bees, which is, printing rapidly more and more money to paper over all of the fraud that has caused the banking collapsing disorder.
That's exactly right. I mean, but somehow the universe has a way of karmically dealing with shyster bankers, whether it was 9/11 or recent the suicides. These bankers end up having a crisis of conscience, and dozens of them have committed suicide. Will Mario Draghi commit suicide as a crisis of conscience? Now that if he ever understands the Holocaust he's provoking? Perhaps. We can only hope.
One of the things about this colony collapse disorder, which they're learning, is that the bees just forget. Like they forget where to go, they get lost. They forget how to get back to their colony, how to get back to their hive. And here we have a banking collapse disorder where people are forgetting what banking is, what money is, what gold and silver used to provide. It was basically a balance sheet of honesty. It was much more difficult to defraud in a way that we now have. And instead, again, we're just coming up with a solution which is much more expensive than just doing the real thing, getting back to what nature and natural money is.
Yeah, maybe Mario Draghi needs a bee enema. I'd like to see that. All right, Stacey, thanks.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half. A whole lot more. Well, welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time to turn again to our second part of our interview with Roger Ver, an angel investor in many Bitcoin companies, including Blockchain.info, BitPay, Kraken, and more. Roger, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, what is Kraken?
Kraken is the predominant Euro Bitcoin exchange. And they accept customers from anywhere in the world, but basically, if you have pieces of paper issued by governments and you prefer Bitcoins because they can't be controlled or manipulated, you can send your euros or dollars or whatever to Kraken and exchange them for Bitcoins. And then once you have your money in Bitcoin, you can send and receive it with anyone anywhere in the world without having to ask for permission from anybody. It just works.
How big is the VC market in Bitcoin-related companies? It seems like it's going through a big growth spurt.
Yeah, basically every VC on the planet is super excited and interested in Bitcoin, and they're pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into Bitcoin startups at this point. Kraken just raised around, BitPay just raised around. All these companies are just raising tens of millions of dollars per company at this point. So we're going to really see Bitcoin entering the mainstream in the next year or two here.
Are you, as an angel investor, an early Bitcoin adopter and man with many, many Bitcoins in various wallets around the world, are you being edged out by some of the bigger money now, if you know what I mean? In other words, if Andreessen comes in from out in California and they're bringing in with hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars of portfolio, Roger, are you able to keep up to speed with these guys?
So my background was actually running businesses more than actually investing in businesses. And I found Bitcoin and realized this is going to improve the life of everybody on the planet. So I took the money I earned from my previous business and invested in a bunch of different Bitcoin businesses. Now I'm so glad to see these other guys coming in and taking over and doing it with their money. And now I'm actually just focusing on working on with the actual businesses I already invested in. So I'm glad they're here, to be honest.
Yeah, of course. I would imagine you would be. So let's talk about the price of Bitcoin, because Okay, there's a lot of money coming in, a lot of VC money. The adoption rate is spreading like wildfire. There are tens of thousands of folks. You mentioned BitPay, which Tony Galippi's been on our show a couple of times, and they're doing remarkably well. The price would seem like it's lagging, or it's stalling, or it's building a base, but it would seem with all this money coming in, at some point it's going to resume that bull market. What do you think?
Yeah, I think pretty clearly so. Right now there's around 13 million Bitcoins in the entire world. I'm pretty sure the population of London is probably a bit more than that. So that means there's not even enough Bitcoin for every single person in London to have even one, yet Bitcoin is being used all over the world by people in every country. So in order to accommodate all these people around the world wanting to use Bitcoin, it's going to have a much, much, much larger market cap than it has today. So each single Bitcoin is going to have to be worth at least tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for one single Bitcoin. And 3.5 years ago when I got involved in Bitcoin, they were less than $1 a piece. If I told other people, oh, they're going to be hundreds of dollars per Bitcoin soon, maybe they would be skeptical. But if you do the math and you look at how incredibly useful Bitcoin is, it's very clear each single Bitcoin is going to have to be worth at least tens of thousands of dollars a piece soon.
Let's talk about different regulatory environments. Different countries are now approaching this in different ways. So Bobby Lee, who had the biggest exchange in China, I saw him up at Coin Summit this year. You know, he was very bullish on Bitcoin, but the Chinese government is taking kind of a, I guess you could say at the moment, a bit of a negative position. What are the countries, name some countries and give us their current regulatory predisposition toward Bitcoin, and is the Isle of Man emerging as Bitcoin Switzerland? Will the Isle of Man be the global hub for Bitcoin activity? It seems like they're lobbying to be that.
Yeah, if the politicians in the Isle of Man are smart, they definitely will want that to be the case. Holland is on fire for Bitcoin as well. The Isle of Man is doing great things. There's a bunch of guys running around down in Panama doing things with Bitcoins, just all over the world. But the really exciting part about Bitcoin is at the end of the day, it's simply a protocol, and it works exactly the same in any country, anywhere in the world, regardless of what laws politicians pass.
All right, let's talk about last year. Of course, you had great Bitcoin news. You had some bad Bitcoin news. Probably the biggest negative story of the year would be the Mt. Gox exchange. So just to explain this a little bit, Mt. Gox, like Kraken or these other coin floor is here in the UK. This is where people exchange their fiat money for Bitcoin. That's not really tied into the blockchain as you've described it in our previous episode. This is a service provided to exchange Bitcoin for different currencies. In the case of Mt. Gox, they had an enormous scandal, and it seemed like an existential threat for Bitcoin, but it completely survived it. You had money at Mt. Gox, correct?
I did.
Can you speak a little bit about your experience and what happened and what kind of effect this will have?
So with Bitcoin, you have the ability to hold your Bitcoins yourself in your own wallet or your own cell phone or your own computer in which you're controlling those Bitcoins. With other types of wallets, you're trusting somebody else to hold your Bitcoins for you, just like you would trust a bank to hold your money for you. With Bitcoin, because you don't need to trust somebody else to hold it, I really recommend that everybody holds their Bitcoins in their own wallet in which they control the private keys, and use Bitcoin exchanges like Mt. Gox, which is no longer around, Kraken, Coinbase, ANX, there's a bunch of them all over the world. Use them to simply exchange your fiat for Bitcoins, but then take your Bitcoins right back out into a wallet in which you control. The reason Mt. Gox was able to become such a big problem is because so many people trusted them to hold their Bitcoins, and they lost the Bitcoins somehow. We don't know exactly how, but if you were holding your Bitcoins in your own wallet, you wouldn't have been affected at all in any way. So the best thing that everybody can learn from this is hold your Bitcoins in your own wallet in which you control the keys. And I personally use blockchain.info for most of my Bitcoins, and it's
right
fantastic.
Here in New York.
Right here in New York, in the UK.
UK.
Yeah, with an office coming in London soon.
Oh, fantastic. We'll have to have Nick on to talk about it. But to follow up on the security issues, another interesting thing, I follow you on Twitter, and you had a wallet, I guess, or an email hacked. And this opened up a very interesting discussion because it opened up for people who are looking for extra security to keep their Bitcoin safe. Just describe briefly what happened and how you resolved it and your advice to people how to avoid this type of thing.
Sure. One of the very, very, I guess, few negative things about Bitcoin is it makes it a little bit easier for people to anonymously extort others over the internet because you don't necessarily know who owns what Bitcoin address. So about a month or so ago, some anonymous person on the internet contacted me and demanded that I pay them around $20,000 worth of Bitcoins, or they were going to basically via identity theft, destroy my life and my family's life and my mother's life and everybody else. So rather than paying the ransom to this person, because I have no guarantee that they wouldn't just demand more money the next day to do the exact same thing, I offered the exact same number of Bitcoins as a bounty to any information that leads to the arrest of that person. And hopefully at some point I'll be paying out that bounty. And I fixed the bounty in terms of Bitcoins. At the time of the bounty, it was around $20,000 worth of Bitcoins. At the current exchange rate, I think it's closer to $30,000 worth of Bitcoins. And someday maybe there'll be hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoins that I'll be willing to pay for any information that leads to the arrest of that person who tried to extort me in that way. And I think that's the best advice for anybody at any point. If you're ever extorted by somebody, don't pay it, because you have no guarantee whatsoever that they're not going to try and do the exact same thing to you the next day. And if you feel really inclined, offer the same amount of money as a bounty, leading to the arrest of that person as well. And
but there was another piece of advice you gave, which, if we can reconstruct it here, about domain name servers. You had they were able to find your a password by drilling into an old email address that gave them access to a domain name vendor, I would imagine. So your advice, basically, to be very careful about, if you could just review that for a second.
Sure. So I had set up a Hotmail account like 15 years ago and had used that to register a domain name maybe 12 or 13 years ago and hadn't thought of it since. And back then, I don't even know if it was very common on the internet, but now there's a thing called the second factor authentication. So any website that you use, if it's an option, make sure to enable the second factor authentication.
But they posed as you in this old Hotmail account, which gave them access to your old account, and in that account also had your password.
And because I didn't enable two-factor authentication on this Hotmail account, they were able to go to the hotmail.com and through some things, I guess, publicly available on the internet, like the city I was born and my birthday and maybe some other things, they were able to reset the password without my permission and then gain access to that old account that had a whole bunch of emails stored in there. Whereas if I had taken the time to enable this second factor authentication, they wouldn't have been able to get in that way. So any website that offers it, enable that. And then if you don't need a bunch of stuff in the cloud somewhere, delete it or put it on some drive locally as well.
Okay, so I just mentioned that as the public service, actually. Yeah. You know, you can review that and go replay the tape and examine exactly what we just said, because it's a good way to offer more protection. Let's move on to some of the other controversies, because they're always, and we have about 3 minutes left. I want to talk about the Silk Road controversy and then talk about the Ross Ulbricht Defense Fund. Silk Road, the government ended up with 30,000 Bitcoin on auction. That seems like a validation of Bitcoin to me, correct?
Seems pretty clear. If the government seizes a bunch of, drugs or guns or illegal things, they don't auction those off. They go and destroy them somewhere. But they seized a bunch of Bitcoins. In this case, the fact that they auctioned them off seems pretty clear that the government's stance is Bitcoins are legal, and apparently they're happy to even sell them.
Okay, so another huge upside for Bitcoin. Let's talk about, you've donated $165,000 to the Ross Ulbricht Defense Fund. Tell us how that figure came about and why. Who is Ross Ulbricht?
So about a couple of years ago, there was a website set up on the internet called the Silk Road that was set up, and it allowed people anywhere in the world to be able to buy and sell anything they wanted, from books to drugs.
Silk Road.
Silk Road was the name of that website. It was on a part of the internet called Tor, which is a part of the internet in which people can host websites anonymously and access websites anonymously. This person, Ross Ulbricht, I have no idea if he is or is not the creator of that website, but the U.S. government seems to think that he is. From my perspective, in my view of the world, each individual human being owns their own body, and they have the absolute right to put whatever they want in their own body. And if a bunch of politicians get together in a room and write down words on a piece of paper saying you're not allowed to put something in your body, I don't care. They've never met me. I've never met them. I don't think they have any right to say what I do or don't put into my own body.
So this is a defense fund for Ross.
So
essentially,
this is to pay for Ross's lawyer. Because the U.S. government's really trying to overreach on this case on a number of things. So I understand some people do think drugs should be illegal, but Ross isn't even accused of actually selling any drugs. He's simply accused of setting up a website that allowed other people to sell drugs. But if you think about that, what are cell phone companies doing? What are internet service providers doing? What is anybody that's providing any sort of service? If somebody happens to use that service for something illegal, should the provider of that overall service be held responsible for that? It seems like a really dangerous, slippery slope for the U.S. government to be trying to say that sort of thing.
Okay, we live in a world where you've got folks like Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks. Is there a potential for the blockchain to be kind of a turbocharged WikiLeaks type service, where people are actually paying through Bitcoin for leaks or sponsoring leaks, and that would give a lot of transparency. I see you smiling. Do you have an opinion on this? I mean, you're I guess, a libertarian. So does this fit your ethos as such? And is that where we're going? Is that a good thing?
Well, if you're a fan of the whole political process and believe that people need to vote for what's going on, you need to be informed of what's going on and have knowledge about what you're voting on. If the government's taking a bunch of money from people in the forms of taxes and then spending it on all sorts of things secretly that we have no idea about, how can we possibly be thought to have informed consent when we place votes for different things?
So the answer is yes.
So the short answer is yes, and there's already really smart people working on these systems to make those things possible, to actually provide economic incentives for people to leak secret things about what governments are up to, and I think that's a good thing.
Well, it's fantastic. I think, well, we'll have to check in later. Thanks so much. We got to cut it off, but we'll have you on again when your whirlwind global Roger Ver evangelical Bitcoin tour. Next time you're in London, you have to come back on.
Thanks so much.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Bitcoin investor Roger Ver. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.